seems to stabilise the people coming in. All right, so hi everyone. I am Cameron. I am the Vice Chair of the newly founded West Midlands Young Fabians. Really excited to have our first event with Liam Byrne, who is the Member of Parliament for Hodge Hill and Labour's candidate West Midlands Mayor. And now I'm going to hand over to our brilliant chair, Nathan, just to have a quick give us a quick idea about why we found this group and what we aim to achieve. Over to you, Nathan.
Thanks, Cameron. I'm Nathan. I'm the chair of the Young Fabians West Midlands Network, and I'm really thrilled you're all able to join us this evening to hear from Liam. Before we introduce him, I just wanted to say a few words about why we're launching the West Midlands Network for the Young Fabians. I joined the Young Fabians after Keir Starmer was elected, and I really wanted to find a new way to get involved in Labour, and I noticed that there were regional networks around the country. So I talked to Mark, who's the chair of the Young Fabians, who's there, about whether there was one I could join in the West Midlands, and he said there wasn't, but suggested we could look into starting one. And I thought that was a great idea. So our remit covers everything from Herefordshire, Worcestershire in the south, up to Staffordshire, taking in Warwickshire, Shropshire, Birmingham, the Black Country. And the committees here this evening, we've got Cameron, Marie and Ben from Birmingham, as well as Sirhan, who lives out in Leamington. I'm in Coventry. And our aim really is to put the West Midlands into what the Young Fabians are doing. We believe that the West Midlands is actually the most exciting place to be on the left. We think that there won't be a Labour Party majority in the UK until we win that key West Midlands seats. Cast your mind back 15 years, Labour Party candidates were victorious in 39 of the 59 seats across the region, winning in North Warwickshire, Redditch, Worcester. We won 9 out of 12 Staffordshire seats at the time, but today Labour holds 14 of the 28 seats in the West Midlands metro area, only 1 of the other 31 in the region. There's huge room for growth. People who've voted Labour in the past and would be open to kind of smart, achievable policies from the left, which is why we're hearing from Liam tonight to hear all about those. His campaign's the best shot for Keir Starmer's Labour to land a real blow on the Tories in 2021. So we're seeking to put the West Midlands right in the middle of what Young Fabians are doing. We're working with the Criminal Justice Network. We're contributing to an Econ and Finance Network's pamphlet coming up. We're really excited to have James from the Devo Network here and Laura from the Environment Network with us tonight. I hope it illustrates that the West Midlands is the cutting edge of change in those areas. And we're just really pleased that there are other undercover West Midlanders in the Young Fabians national team, like Louis and Emma, who are helping us to use the podcast and the blog to talk about West Midlands policy. So my message to you this evening really is just that if you think that you'd like to work with us to help make sure that the Young Fabians conversation focuses on this crucial region, then please get in touch through Twitter or Facebook, or perhaps you'd like to incorporate a West Midlands perspective into what you're doing, and let us know. We'd love to help with that. So thanks for listening to my little pitch, and we'll hand over to Marie now, who's going to introduce Liam.
Thanks, Nathan. As Cameron said, we're delighted to welcome Liam Byrne MP as the speaker for our first event of the West Midlands Young Fabians. Liam has been the MP for Birmingham Hodge Hill since 2004, and he is now running as the Labour candidate to be Mayor of the West Midlands. In his parliamentary career, he has been a strong voice for our region, securing the redevelopment of New Street Station while serving as Minister for the West Midlands under Gordon Brown. He has also served as Minister for the Cabinet Office and as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Liam is fighting a campaign of radical compassion, ending homelessness, kickstarting a green industrial revolution, and rebuilding the solidarity of our region. He's very kindly agreed to come on today and talk to us more about his campaign and the vision he has for the West Midlands. I'll now hand over to Liam.
Excellent. Right, Marie, Cameron and Nathan, thank you so much for inviting me along. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here this evening, because it really doesn't feel very long ago that I was sitting where you're sitting when I joined the Young Fabians back in Manchester University, back at the very beginning of the 90s. And so really what I wanted to do tonight, if it's okay, is just say 3 things about the Young Fabians, why the Young Fabians are so important. I want to say a word about the Metro Mayor election and the implications for our region, but also the implications of the campaign for Labour more generally. And then the final thing I'd like to talk about is you, really, and how we want to make sure that this campaign is a space where you can flourish, where you can get stuck in, where you can learn, where you can meet others, and earn some spurs, really, in a way that I hope will advance your own political ambitions and your opportunity to serve inside the Labour movement. So let me kick off with why the Young Fabians is so important. So I joined when I was a student at Manchester, and back then, you know, we were fighting different fights. There was absolutely conflict within the Labour movement at the time, and the Young Fabians was a place where good people came together to think, debate. It was definitely the intellectual wing of Labour students back then, but the relationships that I formed with friends back then are relationships that are still with me now. The people that I met through the Young Fabians back in the early 90s are still amongst my best political friends today. And so it's something I learned, really, is that the relationships that you make, the people that you meet, they may well stay with you for the rest of your time in politics. And that's a tremendous opportunity. And I think the Young Fabians provides a really good space to do that. And it's what's just been so impressive about the Young Fabians over the last few years in particular is the way that it's evolved, the way that people get together to think, to publish. Publishing is so important. I can't tell you how frustrating it is, as somebody who loves ideas and someone who loves writing, how few of my colleagues in Parliament think, write, debate, publish, reflect on the feedback that they get, and do it all again. And that kind of tradition, those kind of instincts that you hone in the Young Fabians, they're just so important. So I was elected onto the Young Fabians National Committee not long after I left Manchester, and with a couple of friends, Tom Happold and Zoe Conway, we founded Anticipations, which is incredibly still going. And I remember the first interview that we did with Zoe did with Dennis Healy back then, and Dennis was, from a different generation to us, but epitomized that spirit that we were hoping to rekindle, which was an intellectually robust, rigorous, policy, argument, ideas-led form of politics. Because ultimately, politics is a battle of ideas, and our ideas don't prevail unless they're better than the opponents. And so the Young Fabians genuinely is a unique space where you can meet others, work with others, think, write, publish, reflect, and do it all again. And the way in which I think the Young Fabians has moved into new policy-making networks and into digital over the last few years, I think has been brilliant. And I just, I really hope that you guys can help take that to new places over the next year, because it has been quite London-centric, I think, over the last 20 years, if not longer. And it's going to come down to you guys to do something about that. So you're a very important group. You're a very important group within the future of the Labour movement and its evolution, not just for what you do now, but what you do together over literally the decades to come. So don't ever forget that. It's a really special kind of place. Now, we obviously want to get you as involved in our campaign for the Metro Mayor next year as much as we can. I mean, we love campaigning with you. Lots of you have been out delivering leaflets with me for a long time. Many of you were on my phone banks during the selection. And, we won because we were ideas led. And that's why we're going to win next year. But the role that we play in Labour next year is not simply about taking the biggest Tory scalp in the country next year. It is about creating a new story for our region and showing, crucially, that Labour is now on the road to rebuilding the Red Wall. That is why, from Keir Starmer down, Labour is really clear that the West Midlands Metro Met is the single most important election that Labour will fight next year. You know, God willing, we will win in Wales, we will win in London and Manchester. Scotland, as people know, is quite a long road back. But to win in the Midlands is absolutely key to us showing how, you know, a year or so into Keir Starmer's leadership, we are now back on the road, back on the path to Downing Street. Now, in winning, we have a political point to prove on the night in May. But then we've got a much wider role to play beyond that. If you look back over Labour's history, what you see time and again is the way that after catastrophic defeat, we reinvent and renew ourselves in local government. And if you go back to the 1930s, catastrophic defeat for us in 1931, 1933, Herbert Morrison wins control of London County Council. And over the next 5 years in London and elsewhere, there's a revolution in municipal socialism. And many of the ideas that are developed then in both policy and in campaigning are what then shapes that seminal 1945 manifesto, Let Us Face the Future. And there's a reason that people like Sadiq, people like Andy Byrne, people like me, we all served in cabinet together, but we have chosen to go and fight on the ground because we know it's at the grassroots that we reinvent and renew for new times. So the ideas that I want to pioneer together with you in the West Midlands will change the West Midlands for the better, will get rid of homelessness and hunger in our region, deliver on those big social justice values that we've got. But by proving new ideas in practice, we will shape the manifesto that will take Labour back into government in a few years' time. I want those ideas invented in the West Midlands. And so, you know, I said in a Labour List interview a month or two ago, we have an unofficial motto on our campaign, which is let's just get shit done. I mean, we genuinely are so frustrated with Andy Street. Here is a guy, here is a Tory mayor who has tested to destruction the idea that we can get things done in our region by phoning a friend. Actually, Andy Street phoning a friend has failed time and time again. It's no longer time to phone a friend. It's now time to fight our corner. And that is why we need a Labour mayor. So the story that we tell over the next couple of months has been, you know, these are not the kind of the mad thoughts of Liam Byrne. I mean, these are ideas that we have researched with literally thousands of surveys back from residents across the region. Many of you helped deliver that first big direct mail that went out over the summer. Thousands of replies came back in paper and online. From what we heard, there are sort of three big ideas, what we call our trinity of ideas that emerged from that. First, there's a story about the economy and jobs, because worries about jobs and unemployment are the number one issue by a mile. And indeed, we think that unemployment could rise by up to 40% in our region next year. So people are right to be worried. But, you know, people don't simply want us to get the region back to work. They want us as a region to be a leader again. And so what we've tried to do is marry together what people said they liked about lockdown with our big ambitions for the future. So when people said, when we asked people about lockdown, they said, you know, they liked the resurgence in community spirit, they liked less pollution, they liked less traffic, they liked the cleaner air. And they worry now that we've got to recover first and then go green. You know, they worry that green is more expensive and we need to just get back on our feet and then go green. And they absolutely feel conflicted about that because they're conscious that they're kicking the can down the road and they don't think that's a great thing to do. That dilemma dissolves when you talk about us becoming once again a home of green manufacturing, the place that actually makes the technologies that the world needs to cut carbon and stop this planet-frying heat wave that is on its way. And if you think about where we are, down, you know, Coventry and Birmingham in the south, up to, say, Derby and Nottingham, over to Stoke, and then down through the Black Country, we actually anchor this metal triangle that happens to make the electric vehicles, the planes, the zero carbon railways of the future. We genuinely could be the place that helps the world decarbonize its transport system. And we can do that in a way, I think, that can create good jobs. So the idea of us becoming the first net zero carbon city region, people like that if you can marry it to an idea about us becoming the green workshop of the world. That's how we made our fortunes in the past. That's how we trade our way back to recovery. That's how we earn the money that we need to pay for the NHS that's been worth its weight in gold. These are literally things that people said to us in focus groups and in surveys. So our economic story is a story about leadership, and it's about us leading the green industrial revolution in our country. Second, we want to do this in a way that transforms life chances for young people. We want to end this basic injustice that is still true today, that the postcode where you're born defines your possibilities in life. That is a basic injustice that we have to smash. And so what we have to do is harness your ideas, your creativity, your energy to put forward a plan for young people that genuinely creates in our region the best place to grow up. Keir Starmer says he wants Britain to be the fantastic place to grow up. Well, look, let's pioneer that in our region. So that will include putting youth workers back in each neighbourhood. It will mean a big programme around tomorrow's engineers, where we bring schools, colleges, universities together. You will have lots of other ideas to put into this pot, but let us tell a story about our incredible young people that we put front and centre in this campaign, because we are the youngest region in Europe. We've got a special responsibility to get this right. And then the final piece of the puzzle then, is something that I've just learned so much about serving Hodge Hill for the last 16 years. We are really proud in this region that we are a poster child for a diverse community that lives together well. But the truth is, after the Brexit referendum, we all knew and felt that that cohesion was in peril. It was in peril from extremists and supremacists on so many different sides of the debate. And that jeopardized and threatened the way that we come together as a community to live and to love. And what people saw during lockdown is the way they got to know their neighbours for the first time, going out to clap for carers on a Thursday night. They set up street-based WhatsApp groups. My son's just come back from, the Northfield Food Service, set up in no time at all after Gary Sandbrook voted against free school meals for children in his constituency. The way in which we surge together to help look out for each other has just been spectacular. And wherever you go, and I do this a lot, wherever I go, it's Labour people who are collecting the food and packing the food and distributing the food and basically organising things. And it's a brilliant reminder of a book Attlee wrote in 1920 called The Social Worker. And that was based on Attlee's experience in the East End of London after World War I. But it was basically a reminder that if you're in the Labour Party, you're a social worker because you believe in society. That is what socialism is about. You believe in society, you believe in cooperation. Those are your ethics, and you make it greater by serving it. We genuinely do face now a choice between chaos and community. And we as the community party have a special responsibility to think about the way in which we breathe the hubbub of community life back into existence right the way across our region. So those three ideas, the green workshop of the world, leading the green industrial revolution, creating better chances for young people, and building communities that look out for each other and are therefore safer and stronger. Those are the trinity of ideas that will animate the arguments that we put before people in the region next May. How do we do that? That's where we need your help. So the thing I've posted in the chat link is the Help Shape the Plan questionnaire. I mean, there's 1,000,001 questions in it, just answer what you feel like. But we really want to harness the social intelligence of our region in answering these questions. We genuinely want to put forward a people's plan for how we do things differently. And I suppose the final point I'd make is about the character of the leadership that we offer, because, we need now a mayor who stands up for the region, not a mayor who just stands by. And that's what we've got. But the way in which we really make a difference will be about transferring power down. It's not about me, it's about us. It's about shifting power and resources to people, politicians on the front line, in wards, in neighbourhoods, where they can genuinely make a difference. It's what I've called the servant model of leadership, not the hero model of leadership. I don't need to stand on pedestals having selfies taken, much as that might pass the hours. What we genuinely need is people in our streets, in our wards, in community centres, on the front line, getting shit done. That is what this political movement that we're building is all about. And that really takes me to, you know, what I think could be and should be your role in all of this. I didn't stand for public office until I was 33. So I stood in the Stetchford and Yardley election and came 5th. But I'd been a political activist for so long, and it took me until then, you know, before I stood for office. And then, you know, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time and was kind of elected to Parliament in the Hodge Hill by-election as a dad with a young family. And I wish I'd done it earlier, you know, and I wish I'd gotten involved in a lot of the community work that I do now earlier, because that is where I've learned everything. And that's what I hope you can do. And so my offer really to you guys is, you know, think about what you want to do. Think of the ways in which you want to serve. It could be ideas, it could be campaigning, it could be organization, it could be packing food parcels. I don't care what it is, but think of the ways and find the ways and just put yourself forward. Just come and get involved in some way, because this is an amazing campaign that has brought together an incredible coalition of people. And I think, you know, we may well win in May. And, you know, for those of you who have gotten involved in the campaign stage, that is just going to make it easier to get involved in the work of the administration after May, turning ideas into action, and through that action, drawing out the experience that we then put forward to shape the future of the Labour Party and the Labour movement over the 2 decades ahead. It's not going to be long before, you know, you guys are doing the kinds of things that I'm now doing now, and everything you do sort of between now and then will shape your vision about what's important and what is right. So, you know, please get stuck in. Please give it what you can. We'd love to have you on board. Going to stop there. Very happy to take questions. Thanks.
That's great. That's great, Liam. And no, this is such an important mayoral election, especially when you consider Andy Street has just not benefited our region. Anyway, he talks about having connections to the government, but that's not achieved. It's not achieved much. He's probably achieved a mile of tram track, which doesn't go particularly anywhere. And he's lost John Lewis, of which he was managing director of. We can't even keep his own form of firm in Birmingham. Then what's the point of him? And so I am going to hand over to James Potts, who has some interesting questions about how Liam plans to work with local authorities in his role as mayor if he's elected.
Thank you, Cameron. Yes, so hi, Liam. Thanks so much for taking the time tonight to come and speak to us. I mean, obviously, there's a sort of a set of powers that the Mayor of the West Midlands currently has, but obviously, no doubt, if you're to be elected, you're going to be pushing for more powers to be devolved to the West Midlands. And given that, you know, Manchester has control over health, and, you know, there's kind of a different menu of powers that are being devolved to different combined authorities. Which ones do you think you should be pursuing if you were to be elected as mayor come next May?
So a lot of the powers that we need, we've got, is the truth. I'll give you an example of that. So right now, there's nothing cheaper than public debt, and there's no, you know, bigger need for investment than we have in our region. Our region is going to be the hardest hit of any region by COVID, and if there's a no-deal Brexit, then we truly are in desperate trouble. We have a borrowing limit of about £1 billion. We're using about 12% of that at the moment. So, you know, there is well over £800 million available to us to, you know, build council houses, or indeed invest in renewable energy, or accelerate very light rail, or push forward reforms that we need for clean air zones. You know, there are so many things that we could do actually with the resources that we've got. The one set of powers that we don't have quite enough of is around skills and training. So we have the adult skills budget, about 120 million, but we don't have real access to the apprenticeship budget. And we don't have a lot of power to shape further education spend, and obviously no latitude over higher education spend. Now, the reason that all of that is quite important is that you can't have an industrial policy if you haven't got a skills policy. And right now we haven't got a skills policy. So we can't, so Britain as a country, for example, is undertraining about 60,000 engineers a year. I think we should be trying to fill that gap from our region, but we can't do that unless we bring together schools, academies, further education colleges, and about 4 of our universities to create a clear professional and technical education track. So extra power and resource would help us do that in a way that would help us attract a hell of a lot more investment to our area. But I think a lot of the challenge is genuinely about devolving budgets to often to ward level councillors. So, you know, silly example, in Birmingham, a ward councillor has got access to the grand total of about £15,000 to do a year to do traffic stuff, road stuff. I mean, you can't even build a level crossing for that. Level crossings cost £25,000. So how can you control speeding in your ward? How can you implement low traffic neighbourhoods in a way that is bottom up? You can't. So, you know, again, it's a really interesting contrast to Andy Street, because Andy Street is a man who likes a big shiny project in the centre of town that he can cut a ribbon on, and that isn't actually what people want and need right now. They want sports, you know, they want 4G sports pitches in parks. They want floodlights. They want traffic calming. They want clean air zone monitors. You know, it's the little things in the fabric of everyday life that people want. That's what will really make a difference. You know, there's that old saying that all politics is local. Well, now politics is hyper local. You know, the horizon that people have right now is really shrunk back to their immediate roads, you know, and neighborhoods. So that's where we've got to kind of put the power, you know, with our elected front line. So health, I'm a bit wary of, just because the health service is actually going to take quite a long time to rebound from what they've gone through. The one exception I'd make is around mental health services for young people. So I've, you know, worked on this a lot, and I've, you know, talked about mental health issues that I've had over the last few years as the child of an alcoholic, and that led me to do quite a lot of research into mental health services for young people in my constituency, and they're non-existent. So I think if there is one strategic area of health that we should seek power and resource over, it's probably mental health services for young people. But I think at this stage on health, that's probably about as far as I'd go.
That's really great, and obviously, like I said, there's quite a lot of, you know, sort of everything there kind of stems from financial devolution in one form or another. So, I mean, obviously, you mentioned sort of the borrowing limit at the moment. Is there other sort of financial powers that you'd like to see come down in time? I mean, obviously, I know the mayor can charge a council tax precept, and I think that's quite common across the metro mayor areas. But is sort of extra financial devolution also important to this agenda?
Yeah, so the Metro Mayor, I mean, the current mayor has actually proposed an increase in the precepts next year, which I won't oppose. The skills system could be transformed with the devolution of 5 different funds. So there is the Shared Prosperity Fund, which replaces EU structural funds. We don't know what that will look like, but it will be worth about £1 billion a year nationally. There's the National Retraining Fund, the National Skills Fund, and then there's the apprenticeship budget. And if you package those 4, they're all sort of held in 3 different departments in government. If you brought them together and devolved it, we could then put it in a pot with the adult skills budget and create a genuine right to work and a genuine right to retrain. That would be a heck of a prize for us. So there's those are probably the kind of immediate priorities for me.
I mean, 3 departments working together, it sounds like joined up government, if you ask me. No, I mean, turning my attention, so I chair the Young Fabians Devolution Local Government Network, and although I live in London at the moment, I'm originally from Wolverhampton, so I obviously have quite a vested interest in the West Midlands, as you could say. But I mean, obviously, you know, the Metro Mayors are kind of, we're writing a report at the moment on it, and it's very nearly finished. And you know, obviously, there's been these you know, Metro Mayors sort of set up over the last 5-10 years in certain, you know, areas of the country that largely sort of cover big cities, but you know, I mean, just sort of thinking more widely, like what is your opinion on those? Do you think the Metro Mayors have been a force for good in the country? And do you think that, you know, they should be, you know, do you think every area should have one realistically? Or do you think that it should just be those large city regions like the West Midlands? And
no, I feel every area should have. I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. I mean, we have just such a hopelessly centralized country. And you see the price of it when you have clowns at the top of the office, which is what we've got right now. But I think, you know, in our own different ways, the reason that me, Sadiq, Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham, well, certainly me, Sadiq and Andy, who'd all served in cabinet, you know, one of the reasons that we decided that our future lay elsewhere is that we genuinely think that you can get more done on the front line than you can in Whitehall. And the reason for that is that Whitehall is very unstable and very fractured. So on average, ministers change every year or two. That is, you know, too fast to really do anything. But also Whitehall is constitutionally set up to compete with each other, each department one against the other. So it's really hard to join anything up, but you can't deliver any complex change today with one department alone. But it's much easier to join things up on the front line. So it's much easier to get things done on the front line. It's more stable and it's more cohesive. The challenge that we've got, you know, as you know, is that we've got no spatial focus inside government. So, you know, I've argued before that things that would make a difference would be things like full-time regional ministers, select committees for regions. And indeed, you know, I'm a supporter of a reformed House of Lords. You know, I think the House of Lords should be elected on a list basis, like the German second chamber, basically a proportional list, basically that comes from each region, so that you hardwire into Parliament a spatial focus. And then alongside that, you should be devolving far more, particularly around labour market stuff, because that is just sort of most troubling. But you know, there's arguably chunks of science and innovation spending that you should be devolving as well, so that you can actually have a regional science and innovation policy. That's probably enough for one term. I think that would probably, but frankly, you know, if you delivered on some of those things, you would make a seminal difference to the way our country's governed.
No, absolutely. And like I say, like, I used to work for Graham Allen, and Graham always used to
okay, yeah,
he used to talk about subsidiarity and devolution, and you know, obviously the idea of sort of, you know, just kind of, you know, it would be so much better if some of the agendas actually...
I have written a chapter on a book. Actually, I wrote this chapter for Beverly Nielsen and Stephen McCabe. So I will send you that, because it's got the latest mad thoughts of Liam Byrne on.
That sounds great. And I just have one final question, sort of thinking about the Metro Mayors in particular. So in my day job, I actually work at the London Assembly for one of our London Assembly members. And obviously the purpose of the London Assembly is to scrutinise the mayor and to represent citizens in that way. And obviously we're kind of, you know, super constituencies that sort of cover 2 council areas. And obviously that's been relatively, you know, pretty successful over the last 20 years that it's existed. But do you think that something like that would work elsewhere? Or do you think that the current system of having mayoral cabinets made up of the council leaders has been successful? And, you know, which sort of model? I mean, you talk potentially about, you know, the House of Lords being a sort of a regional assembly or a regional based body. So maybe that could be the way of, then maybe they could then scrutinise in the select committee, the Metro Mayor, for example. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I mean, our report that's coming out is kind of like, particularly in the West Midlands, teased out some of the tensions that have existed in the current cabinet. So I think it'd be interested to hear your thoughts on which one do you think works best, and how you think a mayor should be scrutinised.
Yeah, so the current model doesn't work, and if I'm elected in May, I'll change it, and Labour will change it together. So it doesn't work because it doesn't deliver, basically, because the the leaders are all given portfolios that they have absolutely no time to attend to. And they're much too busy running around. I mean, if you're the leader of Birmingham City Council at a time of a COVID crisis, the amount of time that you spend on the Metro Mayor responsibility for transport, I can tell you, is fairly limited. So our proposal is that we will change this so that the leaders kind of move up into a strategic oversight role, and we will create an operational cabinet of delivery champions for each borough. So we would have, a cabinet of basically 7, and those cabinet members are responsible for delivering the combined authority. They're responsible for almost exploiting the combined authority's resources and powers to deliver in their own borough. That then gives us a lot more flexibility to ensure that there's a properly gender balanced cabinet and a balance that actually reflects the diversity of the region. At the moment, it's pretty much white men of a certain age. So changing the operational cabinet is one key change, but then your leaders become your scrutineers, if you like, and they actually have the time and the space, and you deconflict their interest, if you like. They're much more able to hold a mayor to account. Now, the bit that often gets forgotten is the party side of it. So, as is known, I mean, mayors do tend to go mad. They do sort of go a bit power crazy, and they have to be gotten rid of. We have to change the party structure. So at the moment, we don't have a metro area party. That's wrong. We should have a metro area party, and the metro area party should bring together the constituent parts of the Labour movement at a regional level. So that is, party members and CLPs, that is trade unions, it's socialist societies, it's the Parliamentary Labour Party. And we would do far better. I mean, we've ended up creating it, actually. So we created a shadow cabinet for the region about 4 or 5 months ago, and it meets monthly together with Steve Reed. It brings together the Labour leaders. It brings together Keris Way, who some of you know from the GMB for Labour unions. Brings together Jack Dromey, who's the campaign chairman, but also chairman of the West Midlands Labour Party, PLP. And that just allows us to coordinate at a completely different level politically. But that should become the kind of political governance of what the Metro Mayor and the combined authority is doing. So there's a bunch of governance changes that I think you've got to make, but there's also then a bunch of political governance changes that you've got to make as well.
That's really interesting. Obviously, like in London, we have, Sadiq has 10 deputy mayors in sort of different policy areas. So it's interesting to have sort of a locality based sort of, one for Wolverhampton, one for Sandwell, one for Dudley, etc. So that's an interesting idea. And that's all my questions. So thank you so much for taking the time to answer them.
Great. And I have a question from Mark Storm. Go ahead.
Hi, Liam. Thank you for your inspiring words earlier this evening. I'm sure everybody here really appreciates what you've said to us. I am Mark Storm. I run the technology and defense side of the policy networks. And I actually have 2 questions. The first one is the one I put in the chat, which is around building back communities. And doubtless you're familiar with the concept of getting to Denmark by Fukuyama, which is talking about how to get to a perfect community. And I think that question is around how do we actually go about rebuilding communities? Because we can't just, it's great that coronavirus has helped us reform these communities, but we can't rely on that surely to do that for us. So do you have any ideas on that? And secondly is on a particular interest of mine, which is the specific impact of AI on the West Midlands, and if you have any opinions on that, given your experience as Shadow Digital Minister as well.
Yeah, great. So on community building, I mean, this is, what I've spent much of the last 16 years trying to do in Hodge Hill. And I suppose the 3 things that really emerged from that work that we have got to get right. So one, jobs. Communities that are bereft of jobs and economic support pretty quickly go into bad spirals. And so you have to distribute work in quite radical ways. Second, you've got to have much better transport systems, and the West Midlands is bedeviled by the fact that our transport systems all go into the centre of Birmingham, and they're not radial. So it's actually really difficult to get from Northfield to Kings Heath. I mean, that's 2 buses. We don't have good radial transport links at all. So sorting out transport is really significant. But then, you know, there's something around both technical education and mental health services. So we find, you know, that there are, or before the crisis, you know, there were vacancies in the West Midlands, but many people from communities like mine didn't have the technical skills to do them. And it was unbelievably hard to get those technical skills once you'd left the education system for whatever reason. And quickly we found people moving into challenges with mental health that, again, there was no help to support. So there was a mixture of kind of opportunity and resilience and training that we just had to put together in a completely different mix. And the way that comes together is often very, very local. It's very hard to plan from 20,000 feet, which is what, you know, the current mayor is trying to do at the moment. So it is long term, and it is stubborn. And, you know, let's be honest, we've gone back a hell of a long way over the last few years. I did an interview with a Tory MP yesterday, and she was a new young MP, and she was trying to sell a story about how, you know, George Osborne had been fantastic because, you know, the employment rate was so high. And I just sort of gently made the point to her, and the food bank queues had never been longer. You know, the entrenched level of poverty that we've now got. I mean, my son, as I just said, you know, has just come back from Northfield Food Service where he's volunteering. And I sort of said to him, you know, last week, we never used to have this 10, 15 years ago. We just didn't have to organise food services and food banks on the scale that we have to do that today. And he kind of, he didn't believe me. You know, he's 18, you know, for these things have always been with him for as long as he's been sort of, you know, interested in public life. So we've gone back a long way. Now, AI does have, I think, a lot of potential to make it significantly worse. So I put out a book about 2 months ago called Just Transitions, which is a book I can commend, actually. I'll put a link to it in the chat. And the contention of this book is that recovering from COVID, I'm afraid, is the first circle of hell, because what lies beyond that, what we call the 3 rises. So the rise of new technology, the rise in trade conflict, and the rise in temperature. And each one of those impacts has will basically accelerate inequality if we don't do something about it. So automation AI in our region could cost about 200,000 jobs over the next few years. Now, it will create new jobs, but we don't have the systems at the moment to retrain workers who lose their jobs and equip them for the new jobs. So that is a really significant problem, and there is no right to work and there is no right to retrain. So I'm sort of really worried that if we don't kind of get our act together, then what we're going to see are these 3 rises unfold in our region in a way that just exacerbates already acute levels of inequality. And the only people who are going to do something about that is us. You know, I'm afraid no one else cares enough about this to put the region on a different course.
And I believe we now have a Sirhan Wade, who is our outreach officer and also the West Midlands rep on the Co-op Youth National Committee. Over to you, Sirhan.
Thanks, Cameron. Hi, Liam. Thank you for coming to talk to us today. Sadly, although I live in the West Midlands, I can't vote for you as I am in Warwickshire. But I can assure you that Labour members in Shakespeare's County are right behind you. Before I start my
you can phone bank. Dialogue helps you phone bank.
Before I start my round of questions, I just wanted to say thank you for all you've done as an MP to draw attention to the issue of alcoholism. And you alluded to that a little bit earlier, particularly your work chairing the APPG group on children of alcoholics. It's a matter that's really personal to me, and I think it's really important that it gets more attention in the political arena. So thank you for that. To the questions. As the Co-op Party Youth Rep for the West Midlands, I'm particularly interested in your plans to put cooperative values at the heart of decision making. So my questions will be about that. Before we get on to the concrete elements of that, including the fascinating task force that you established earlier this year, I wanted to understand in more general terms, what does cooperation and the cooperative movement mean to you?
Right, great. That's a nice chunky question. So I have thought about this a fair bit this year because I'm working on a second book, which is about the future of cooperation. And the argument really is that cooperation is the midwife of freedom. You know, we have an argument with the right about freedom and justice. And very often in our political discourse, we tend to lead with justice and the right tends to lead with freedom. It didn't used to be like that, actually. I mean, if you go back to the birth of radical politics under the Levelers, you know, during the Civil War, actually our fight was about freedom. But the way that we advanced freedom for ordinary people was by coming together to battle for the rights that we needed to create something called power. And so right now we are in this place where we have got to cooperate as a global community like never before, because it's the only way that we can save the planet. Yet we now have this cancer of populist politics that is seeking not simply to divide and rule, but to enrage and rule. And when you saw the number of votes that people like Donald Trump was able to pile up, even though the guy lost, you can see how toxic this kind of politics is going to remain. And so, you know, for a long time, politics in America has basically been a debate between, or in a plane set by Franklin Roosevelt on the one hand and Ronald Reagan on the other. Trump disrupts that traditional pattern. Equally here, you know, between Attlee and Thatcher, you know, there is a political space. UKIP, Brexit, Johnson, in many ways, they disrupt that and they inject this poison of divisiveness into the body politic that is toxic for institutions that hold us together and which we require to help govern and answer difficult questions. So, you know, I genuinely think that a lot of your political careers are going to be about renewing the art of cooperation, because, you know, we are at a fork in the road now. We do have to choose between chaos and community. And that's why the co-op task force was important in generating some practical solutions, but there was a kind of philosophical message that we were trying to rehearse as well. Hope that answers the question. It's a great question.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the podcasts I've been listening to recently, they often talk about this sort of massive populist sort of disparity between sort of the right and the left, and one of the fascinating things that some of the speakers, some people on those podcasts mention is that despite sort of the values differences that these sort of two extremes have, sort of left and right, the one thing that they both still sort of root themselves into, a lot of their thinking, is a sense of community.
Yeah.
So despite lots of other value differences that both sides have, they do sort of cross on that. There's an intersection there. So that's interesting. So the second question I have moves more to the task force then. What inspired you to establish it in the first place? And how has its findings contributed to your cooperative agenda?
Yeah, so one of the reasons, so there's two levels of answer to this. So one is political, one is policy. So the political answer is, I genuinely think that the way sensible people on the left get organized is by finding good bits of the Labour architecture and make them stronger. The Fabians is one of them. The Co-op Party is another. SERA, the environmental movement, is another. And you know, and you will have others. And those, the truth is that some of these institutions, some of these parts of the Labour family were a bit sleepy. And they had been out-organised within the party. They'd been shown a few new tricks by new organisations like Momentum. And so I wanted to ensure that, I'm trying to build as broad a coalition in the party as possible. But there are old parts of the Labour movement that need rejuvenating. And I just think that the Co-op Party under Joe Fortune and others has gotten stronger and stronger, but there's nothing like a campaign to really energize and electrify. And so that's what I wanted to try and achieve with the Co-op Party. The Co-op Party is really small in the West Midlands. The co-op sector in the West Midlands is really small. It's actually one of the smallest in the country. And yet, if we genuinely want to, and this is the policy stuff, if we genuinely want to try and reshape our economic model, we've got to show that ideas like community wealth building can work on a scale the size of the West Midlands economy. There are many countries in the world that are smaller than the West Midlands. If we can show this agenda can work at our level, then we can prove that they will work at the level of the country. So in a way, we're a pathfinder, I think, for many cooperative politics. And what you'll have seen in the report is that we're kind of crossing the river stone by stone, as the Chinese say. So we're trying to find particular opportunities where we think we can make progress. So Food Justice Network, that is one of the ways that we can make progress. This idea of co-op innovation zones is another, where we bring together anchor institutions and good people in a particular geography. The energy sector is absolutely one of the spaces where we can make some progress, a little bit like the Welsh Assembly Government is doing at the moment. So actually, we didn't talk about this in the report, but actually banking will be a fourth or fifth area. So there are particular kind of institutional changes that we think where we can make an impact in the first term, in the first 4 years, and basically say, look, there's a different way of doing things. We want to prove in practice how these ideas can work. Action speaks louder than words in politics, especially now. And so it's quite a creative relationship with the Co-op Party. But if we can radically grow the co-op sector in the region, and if we can marry it to a stronger Co-op Party organisation, I think we'll do some good, actually. I think we'll do some good with it.
Definitely. One of the aspects of your report that I found quite interesting was you mentioned Sandwell.
Yeah.
And their social value policy that they're introducing for their tendering processes to make sure that there was a sort of community benefit aspect to assessing their application, bidding applications to run council services. I was just thinking, what are your thoughts on sort of encouraging more councils to do that? Are you planning to sort of engage with that?
Yeah. So the idea is that we set up, I don't know what we call it. I mean, it may be, let's just say for the sake of argument, it's called the Office of Community Wealth Building. But it's the idea is that you basically try and coordinate public procurement in the region in a much more intelligent way. So when I was Chief Secretary, we launched a project called Total Place that tried to bring together all of the public spending in a particular place and integrate it far better. And what we realized is that in a place like the West Midlands, public procurement's maybe 15-16 billion a year. That's actually quite a lot of money. And if we were placing those contracts in a way that support the local economy, you'd be doing some good. So I'll give you a silly example. So there is a hospital in the Midlands that will remain nameless, that it puts its catering contract with Break Brothers. Now, Break Brothers ship in meals, including curry, from Newcastle to hospitals in the West Midlands, and the profits they make on that contract are laundered in a tax haven, which happens to be where Break Brothers is headquartered. That's complete madness. Why on earth aren't we using the power of public procurement to support businesses in Alum Rock, which happens to be next door to Heartlands Hospital, down the road from Heartlands Hospital? Now, the reality is that if you are a humble procurement officer in a public organisation, you often feel at the bottom of the food chain. You're not, given access, you're not important, you just have a job to do, and it's all quite legally complicated. So trying to create an office of community wealth building on the one hand, and then a charter for good business practice on the other, and then saying to our colleagues in the public sector, do you know what, we need to now place these contracts with people who have signed the charter. That could make progress. And into that business charter would go things like the race code written by Carl George, which is a really good way of helping organizations reshape their governance so it's much more diverse. Reporting on gender pay gaps, creating environments that recognize trade unions, recognizing organizations that pay the real living wage. We can generally create a different kind of business climate in our region. And you know what? This is what we did 100 years ago. So if you go back to George Cadbury is one of the pioneers of ethical capitalism in our country, and he's headquartered in the middle of the region, and was a perfectly successful business person in his own right. So let's go back to some of the traditions that actually we helped pioneer in this country and rejuvenate them.
Definitely, yeah. It's so essential that councils can play such an important part in keeping wealth, keeping capital flowing locally and supporting their communities rather than just sort of sending them out of the area. We've got in my area we still have council houses, and the council, the contractors that support repairing the council houses, for instance, they tell the council that they've come to do repairs when they haven't. They overcharge. They do shoddy jobs. It's just the how they operate is not in the interests of actually running those services, for one, and two, they're probably not even spending their money locally. They're probably based somewhere else. So there's just that disconnect. So we really need to work on that.
Yeah.
So my third question, moving to a more sort of a regional perspective, how do you ensure that a post-Brexit, post-coronavirus West Midlands economy is rooted in cooperative values?
So the thought that we have here. So if you look at the current debate in economic development, there is basically a new consensus that's emerged in, I don't know, about the last 10 to 15 years, which underlines the importance of economic institutions in fostering good economic growth. So if you look at books like Why Nations Fail, or the work of Hernando de Soto, you can see there's a sort of a burgeoning tradition that underlines the importance of economic institutions. Now, we don't have good cooperative and collective institutions in the West Midlands. So if you look at our banking system, for example, decisions on banking are made in boardrooms in London, or indeed internationally. They're not made here in the region because we don't have a cooperative bank here, but we used to. In fact, the first municipal bank was opened in the basement of Birmingham Council House in 1913, just next door to the water department, and that became TSB. If you go back further beyond that, you can find all kinds of institutions that we built inspired by something called the civic gospel. It was preached by George Dawson on George Street, just next to the NIA, 1870s. He had a really influential congregation. He had 12 councillors in his congregation. 6 of them became Lord Mayor, including somebody called Joseph Chamberlain. So that time when Birmingham was known as the best governed city in the world, we were building municipal cooperative institutions, whether that was in the utilities like gas and water, whether it was doing slum clearance, whether it was rebuilding Corporation Street, whether it was providing capital for local businesses, stock exchanges, schools. We used to do this, and actually it helped us become the place we are today. So you know, what we want to try and do is to create some collective institutions in the capital market, in the labour market, in research and development, in getting rid of hunger, campaigning for food justice. And then, you know, we just want to see what happens when you bring people together at a local scale around cooperative ideas, which is why, you know, the idea I'm secretly most excited about is this cooperative innovation zones idea, because I've been traveling around the region non-stop for 2 years now, and I can see the people, I know the people, and I know the places where this could be brought to life. I wouldn't prejudge what they come up with, but I know it would be amazing. So in a way, it's just giving assets and institutions and ideas and throwing it out there and just say, right, make something of this.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into my final very quick question. Sort of thinking more as young Fabians, but also just sort of political activists, community activists. What can we do? What role can we have in being part of that community building agenda? What do you see sort of our position in that?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting question. So so 25 years ago, when I was doing Young Fabian stuff, you know, it was just all about the thinking and writing. And I think now it's got to be about thinking, writing and doing. So it's got to be a much more kind of Clem Attlee approach to doing things circa 1920. It's got to be, what's the right phrase? It's got to be action orientated in a way. It's got to, you know, you've got to be involved in helping set these things up, and failing, frankly. You know, you've got to remember that old Samuel Beckett line, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. You know, so that kind of culture of being fairly entrepreneurial, fairly innovative, just trying some stuff, you know, what will distinguish you is you then reflect on it and write about it and take the ideas and lived experience into the policy world. But at the moment, there ain't a lot of people who work on both sides of that equation at the moment. We've got a lot of great social activists and we've got a load of great thinkers and writers, but you know, Young Fabians are pretty well placed to do both. And that's when the real yield comes, I think.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liam. And back to Cameron.
And now we have a question from Laura.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Liam, for joining us tonight, and to the West Midland Young Fabians for putting on this event. Liam, I'm currently the communications officer on the Young Fabians exec, and previously was on the Environment Network Committee. Really great to hear about your reflections on your time as a Young Fabian. We're actually doing a history project at the moment, so we'll be in touch with you to get some of those in more detail. My question is actually relating to your work on leading the green industrial revolution, as mentioned in your manifesto, and relating to decarbonisation in particular. Firstly, how can we ensure that the costs of decarbonisation are borne by the wealthiest in our society and don't massively inflate household energy bills for the average person? And also, secondly, how can we make sure that decarbonisation provides the economic stimulus that we desperately need across our been so heavily affected by COVID-19?
Very interesting, this. So we've talked about these questions with residents quite a lot, and what was quite interesting is the thing that people keep coming back to is they would like to make the technologies here. So there is such a deep culture of making here. You know, my great grandparents came here because they'd heard from a long way away that you know, if we can draw it, we can make it here. You know, there's just something in the air here, and that includes public transport. So you know, we've researched public transport options with people a lot, and the truth is that in the survey results that we've got back, public transport is very, very low down the list of priorities. But what is very high up the list of priorities is making the public transport here. So people would like to make the very light rail. They would like to make the bikes. They would like to make the electric vehicles. They would like to make the technologies the world needs to cut carbon. And so I think there's something in that. I think, you know, I'm very interested in how do you develop, how do you build the political consensus for green politics? And this is what we want to test next year in the election. So can you solicit, can you win people's buy-in to fairly aggressive green policies with an argument that it will create good manufacturing jobs that pay you north of £35,000 a year? So we think that is the way. So I think a lot of what we talk about next year when we talk about green politics will come back to actually making things here. And that is, you know, that is often not big shiny projects. You know, retrofitting houses is not a big shiny project, but it is the single most important investment you can make to both cut carbon and create jobs. So retrofit co-ops that help create lots and lots of jobs for people and create zero energy bill homes. Well, that's good. It creates wages, but it also cuts energy costs as well. So I think there's lots of ways in which we can ameliorate costs. So community energy, rollout of community energy, I think is going to be important. Decarbonising heat is going to be really important. And, you know, trying to maximise community ownership and community dividends from those projects. You know, we don't have a blueprint for how we do that, and we may have to experiment with a number of different things in order to get the model right. But it's quite an easy argument to win, I found. I mean, I sort of have tested this in with a number of different people. You know, when you kind of talk to people about using public procurement to, you know, buy things that we happen to make locally, explaining how you can put public subsidy into cutting energy bills, you know, how rollout of electric vehicle charging points can then save you your fuel costs. You can quite quickly show people how much on their monthly bills they can save. And people just think it's common sense. And that's where you've got to get to, I think, with this argument. You've got to you know, take some really big policy objectives that we've got, grind them down into a new common sense. We haven't quite got there yet, but that's what we want to try and achieve in the next 2 to 3 months. All help welcome, I might say.
Absolutely, thank you.
And now I think we have a question from Laurie Duncan.
Hello. Yes.
Hey.
It's quite funny because I've been listening to all the questions and they've slowly been chipping away at the question I was going to ask. Because so I'm a new PhD student at the University of Birmingham doing energy policy, and I've also just become a director of Community Energy Birmingham.
Ah, okay.
And so currently we are a pretty small community energy scheme compared to places like Brighton, or well, a lot of places in the south of England where they've had good local political support sustained for the last 10 years. Birmingham, Community Energy Birmingham has really struggled, and so now with the disappearing of the feed-in tariff, it's even more challenging. And so we're looking at lots of different ways, including retrofit, all of the other models that have been explored. So yeah, it would be really interesting to hear. Well, I'm halfway through filling in the enormous questionnaire form, but it would be great to have some input on community energy, because yeah, there is a huge potential there, definitely, for things like co-benefits as well. It's not just about the decarbonisation. It's definitely looking at it from the perspective of community building and generating some income that can be spent by a community, decided on by the community. Yeah, so that there's definitely a lot there. So
interesting.
I'm glad to hear that it's high on the agenda.
Yeah, well, it's high on the agenda, and we haven't got prescribed answers. So you know, we're not going in with some great big blueprint. I mean, we're going in I think we will go into office basically with a plan for some structured learning, this structured discovery. That's what I really mean. So we know our communities really well. But what I'd said to my team when the elections were moved, I said, we have to build the plans in a hell of a lot more detail, but we've also got to build the coalitions that we need to change things. So, I mean, it's why meetings like this are actually so valuable for us, because we're all going to have to figure this out together. You know, I'm not going to tell you what the answers are. We're going to have to go and figure the answers out. And so, you know, from about 2021 through to 2024, I would say, we're going to have to try lots of different things in lots of different settings to figure out what solutions work in particular environments. So what will work in Bordesley Green is going to be pretty different to what works in Shard End. And that in turn will be different again to what works on the Bromford Estate in the north of Hodge Hill. You know, these are places that are different kinds of communities. They were built at different times, different kind of homes, different kind of transport patterns, different kinds of communities. But we are not going to solve this collective problem that Laura sketched out unless we have a solution set, a toolkit that works in each of those places. And so I think we've probably got about 2 or 3 years at least of just trying stuff, basically, both to figure out technology, both to figure out technology and economic models, I think. But if we can, you know, if we can click through that fairly systematically in the first 2 or 3 years of a Labour mayor, then I think, you know, we will be set up to make some big moves.
Absolutely, yeah, and especially with the Committee on Climate Change's latest recommendations, saying, well, first of all, the big push for decarbonisation has to happen in this Parliament, which is going to be a bit difficult for us to do anything about, but also the impact that local authorities and devolved have to have. Yeah, it's good to hear that. Yeah, I'm very pleased with what I've heard tonight. I'm very new to the Labour Party as well. I've joined over the summer. So
it's always like this. There's normally more beer, I have to say that, but
that is one sad thing about a Zoom event is I can't go to the pub afterwards. You can't buy me a pint.
This is true.
I have one quick question. So you talked earlier about George Dawson and Joseph Chamberlain. And one of the things of Joseph Chamberlain I really admire is the thing to build big shiny things, big public spaces like Victoria Square, the Council House, the University of Birmingham, these great attractive public spaces. How important do you think it is for the region that we get back a sense of sort of scale, grandeur, and pleasant architecture? Because one of the things that comes to mind recently is the Perry Bar station plans, where they replaced a concrete grey box with a metal grey box, and that's not good architecture. It doesn't make an inviting building or place.
Yeah, I'm glad you said this, because I suspect a bit like you, I'm sort of slightly obsessed with the appalling state of public architecture in the West Midlands, and I wrote something about a month ago about the 15-minute world and how actually the 15-minute world was invented in Birmingham, and it was invented by the arts and craft movement. And you know, if you look at Bourneville, or if you look at Moorpool Estate, if you look at the Eagle Building, which is home to Java Coffee, just opposite the council house, you know, these are some of the finest arts and crafts, some of the finest arts and crafts architecture in the world. And so he had a situation, and you know, you can see lots of the tradition in Wolverhampton, elsewhere. So you know, once upon a time we led this, and now we're just kind of building rubbish. So it's really important that we are setting out to refashion the cityscape as somewhere that's beautiful. Now that means good quality architecture. It means it means green space, and it means culture in particular. And it's going to require us to reimagine what city centres look like. So, I mean, if you think about a continental market square, you've got the Minster, you've got the Mayor, you've got the market, you've got places of worship, you've got, you know, places to go shopping, you've got places to hang out, and you've got a constant succession of interesting things to kind of look at. You've got culture. And part of the problem with our communal spaces, our community spaces, whether that's the city centre or shopping centres, is they're just very boring. They're very one-dimensional. They're very vanilla. And actually, we've got to reimagine these spaces as places that satisfy the full range of human curiosity. And, you know, that is one thing that I think we will need to do anyway after COVID, because I don't think people are going to be going into office blocks at quite the numbers they used to be. And so diversifying city spaces so that there's a mixture of residential, retail, culture, faith, interesting staff, entrepreneurial space, it will just make things more interesting. And so we haven't quite got the language of this right yet, but it is basically trying to capture spaces where the hubbub of community life, you know, is really rich. So we have a particular visual iconography for this, which is very focused on markets and festivals. That's how we visually communicate our ambitions on this agenda. But it's just more imaginative than what we've got at the moment. Culture is a big thing. I mean, we don't put enough culture in our public spaces, and we don't celebrate our cultural traditions. You know, we're the home of Black Sabbath. Why haven't we got a House of Metal sorted? It's terrible. It's one thing we're going to fix.
Get that sorted, Liam. Get that sorted. I'll hold you to that. Because they appear to have taken away the Black Sabbath bench on Broad Street as well, or something. It appears to have gone on Black Sabbath Bridge. Yes, so we now have a question from Maria Hill, our secretary. Go ahead.
Thank you. I was just wondering about, I think it's really good that you want to reduce homelessness, because that's definitely something that has gotten much worse in the West Midlands and nationally under the Tory government. So I was wondering how you're going to do that. Is it a matter of building and homing people into council houses, or yeah?
So there's a guy. So I mean, in a way, you know, this is why I'm here tonight, really, because, you know, my journey down this route started with finding a man called Richard in the underpass between New Street Station and Moore Street, and Richard's double amputee. He'd been on the ground there for a couple of days in acute distress, dressed still in his hospital gown with a hospital tag on his wrist. You know, and that for me was the snapping point. That is when I decided to run, because I was just not prepared to serve in a city that was disfigured by this injustice. So along the way, in my explorations of how we end homelessness, I met a guy called Matt Lambert, and Matt Lambert runs one of the big homeless charities in Wolverhampton. And Matt has a really good line, which is that we're not trying to end houselessness, we're trying to end homelessness. So we can build houses, and we need to build council houses, because the number of council houses we're building in the region have fallen by 82% since 2010. So like in Walsall, they built none last year. You know, Birmingham, we built 140. But it's, you know, there is a housing building problem we've got to fix. But the difference between a home and a house is that in a home, you have a wealth of relationships that sustain you and nourish you. It's a place where you feel at home. It's a place where you feel warm. It's a place where you feel cherished. And, you know, I think about, you know, why did my dad not end up on a pavement? Well, he didn't end up in a pavement because when things went wrong, I went round and sorted it out. You know, I picked him up from A&E and took him home and make sure he was fed. You know, there was a wealth of relationships around him that were a safety net for him in moments of distress. And many people who are homeless don't have that wealth of relationships. Now, you can see the problem right now with this policy called Housing First, which has got many virtues. But what ends up happening is they put people in houses and buy white goods, give them keys to the front door, but there's no relationships. There's no services to sustain them. And so, you know, what we genuinely have to do, I think, on quite a local, quite a customized level, is find better ways of weaving that web of nourishing relationships and services under a roof. And that's how you end homelessness. So it's complex change. It does indeed start with building more council houses, but that can't be the end of it. You've got to surge forward mental health services. There's a number of things we have to do with DWP, and you have to end this rule about no recourse to public funds, because, you know, any of us who have been out, you know, with groups of a night serving food, know that half the people that you meet are East European, generally, or they have a difficult asylum claim and they've got no recourse to public funds. So, you know, my guesstimate, certainly end of last year, was that about half the people sleeping in Birmingham city centre have got no recourse to public funds. So you can't end that without fixing that too. Now, that's a government decision, and so we have to kind of just innovate our way through that until Labour is in power. So there's no one thing that we can do, but there is definitely a range of little things that we can do that I think would make a seminal difference. And that's our moral mission. I mean, that's the moral mission at the heart of what we need to do after May.
Well, thank you.
Right, I believe we have a question from Ben, our secretary, but also, as we've only got about 5 minutes left, has anyone else got a question? We'll do this last round in a round of 3. James? James and Ben.
Hi, Liam. Thanks very
Okay.
much for thanks very much for coming along tonight. It's been really interesting. My question's a little bit more practical, shall we say, because I know my experiences in Wolverhampton last year at the election were twofold in terms of why we lost. It was people on the doorstep either saying they used to vote for us, but now they don't because of either Jeremy Corbyn or because of Brexit. Now, by the time your election rolls around, fingers crossed, both of those will not be on the table anymore. But what they leave behind is a problem of trust, if you will. So a big problem over the next few years, even when Brexit sorted out and even though we're under new leadership, is going to be winning back that trust from different communities. So I'm quite interested in your thoughts of how we do that on a more practical level.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the best I can answer is that we genuinely have to not reinvent ourselves, but rediscover our traditions as the community party. So, you know, if you go back, here's an illustration. If you go back to many of the trade union banners of the early 19th century, they were pretty much all they all carried a quote from the book of Isaiah. They said to each other, "Be not afraid," and every man was his brother. You know, there was a sense of looking up, being stronger by looking after each other, and that combination giving courage in the face of adversity. And I think about that quote quite a lot, because that is sort of what I see amongst people who I work with in food banks. You know, they're from all walks of life, but there's an awful lot of Labour people who are running it. And it's a really potent reminder of our soul, really, our roots as a community party. And funnily enough, I think they do quite a good job of this in Wolverhampton at the moment. So we're publishing a film tonight, which I shot with Councillor Beverley Mahmoud-Abadi, who some of you know, won Councillor of the Year this year, who is just a force of nature. And we shot it in XL Food Bank, just a church in her ward. Well, they're all Labour people, running this food bank, all doing amazing stuff. And I said this to Keir when he came up recently. I said, our brand almost, it needs to be we are the community party, from the community, for the community, we're the folk, sleeves rolled up. When the shit hits the fan, we are the people who will be looking out for each other. And there's a real sense now that communities that are strongest are communities that look out for each other. And that's who we are, actually. I mean, we are the people who look out for each other. It has the benefit of being true. But I can't claim to have got this quite cracked, but being proud of that brand. I mean, that brand, what is a brand? I mean, a brand is your tribal badge in a way. We are cooperators. We are a community. That is how we believe in making change happen. So I think that is probably the best I've come up with so far to that very difficult question.
No problem. Cheers, Liam.
And a final question from Benedict.
Oh, sorry, Liam. Thought I was slightly conscious of time as well. I'm actually without portfolio at the moment on the West Midlands Young Fabians Committee, so I think Cameron slightly misspoke there. One of the things that is great about the West Midlands is we've got some of the best sort of higher education for computer science across the county and across the region. We've also got one of the highest rates of digital poverty as well, and that's only really happened through coronavirus. And Wolverhampton Council, a Labour council, kind of stepped in where the MPs kind of failed in terms of providing 4G sort of dongles and cards for the region. Real big success. How do we kind of bridge that gap between the digital poverty that a lot of our primary schools kind of face and our young people face across the region with these world-class institutions? And I think your impact report said that the actual technological services that we've got across the West Midlands are going to be impacted slightly less than the other sort of industries we've got. So it could become a real kind of opportunity to kind of to really grow.
So I don't know the answer to that. I think it would be great to get your advice on it. You put your finger on something really important. I mean, most of my head teachers in Hodge Hill say that all the progress they've made in the last few years has been wiped out. All of them have got stories of, their kids, maybe one laptop between, 2, 3, 4 kids at home, no printer, no Wi-Fi. So the concept of blended learning is a nonsense, really. Lots of schools, didn't get laptops in place in time before the government suddenly switched off the scheme without really telling anybody. So then, I mean, you're right. There must be an opportunity there, but quite how we make it happen, I don't quite know.
I think apprenticeships, are probably going to be the best vehicle for it, and really kind of using these industries and thinking about apprenticeships for sort of the 21st century, sort of into your data sciences, into your kind of software engineering, as well as, of course, through more traditional routes. I think that could be a really potent vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we've got to try and get across is that, everything is digital, but absolutely the manufacturing industry is now digital as well. And so, I often tell this story about Matthew Bolton and how the factory that he built at the Soho manufactory had the best engineers in the world, like James Watt. But it also had the best artists in the world. He hired the world's greatest engravers and painters to help him manufacture things that were just stunningly beautiful. And, in a similar way these days, most of the value in a manufactured product is digital. There's more code in a Jaguar XF than there is in an Airbus. Yet the infotainment system's worth much more than the engine. So there is a kind of a value shift here that we've got to try and get across. So we've got this concept that I think we'll work with the Royal Academy of Engineers on, which is about tomorrow's engineers, which I think we'll try and use as a way of figuring out how you get schools and colleges and universities together with industry in a much more cohesive way. You know, and I'm basically hoping that we can figure out the reform of the education system from that exercise. But yeah, love your views on that. I mean, that would be something that you could really help us figure out.
Cool, thank you. I think that was the last question, Cameron.
Thank you everyone for coming. It's been a really interesting discussion. I think we've all learned a lot about how important this race in May is as crucial test for Keir Starmer's leadership, for whether Labour can be the next government and how we can actually make progressive change in the West Midlands. So if you want to get involved, get in touch with us. We're really keen to get ideas for events, for writing things, for maybe pamphlet ideas in the future, and articles and blogs. So thanks everyone for coming.
Brilliant. That's been great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.